A Werewolf Shifter Romance. Written by Amelia Hart. Chapter 1. Forest's Cry. The morning mist clung to the mountains surrounding the kingdom of Lightmere like ghostly fingers, reluctant to release their grip on the ancient pines. Maya Vexbane pulled her worn cloak tighter around her shoulders as she made her way along the forest's edge, her leather satchel bouncing against her hip with each careful step. At 22, she had learned to move quietly through these woods, to take only what she needed and leave no trace of her presence. The border between the village lands and the royal forest was marked by old stone cairns, weathered smooth by countless winters. Maya kept to the permitted side, her trained eye scanning for the herbs that grew wild in the shadow of the great trees. Wintergreen for aching joints, willow bark for fever, chamomile for restless sleep. These plants were her livelihood, the only inheritance her grandmother had left her before passing into the spirit realm 5 years ago. The scent of pine sap and rich earth filled her nostrils as she knelt beside a patch of moss-covered stones where she'd spotted wild thyme growing in abundance. Her fingers worked quickly, harvesting the fragrant leaves with practiced efficiency. The early morning light filtered through the canopy above, casting dancing shadows across her work. Maya's long, straight brown hair fell like a curtain around her face as she bent to her task, the simple braid she wore already coming loose from her morning's labor. Her brown eyes, warm as honey in sunlight, remained focused on her gathering. She had learned long ago that survival meant paying attention to details, that a moment's carelessness could mean the difference between a full belly and an empty one. It was then that she heard it, a sound that made her blood run cold. A low, keening whine drifted through the trees from deeper within the royal forest, a sound of such desperate pain that it seemed to claw at her very soul. Maya's hands stilled on the thyme, her heart beginning to race. She knew that sound. She had heard it once before, years ago, when a village dog had been struck by a runaway cart and lay dying in the street. But this was no village dog. This sound came from something much larger, something wild. Maya rose slowly to her feet, her satchel forgotten as she strained to listen. The whining came again, weaker now, accompanied by what sounded like small, desperate cries. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory, stern and unforgiving. Never enter the royal forest, child. Those lands belong to the Alpha King, and trespassers face his judgment. Yet even as the warning rang in her ears, Maya found her feet carrying her forward, drawn by an invisible thread of compassion that had always been her weakness. The sounds were growing fainter. Whatever creature was making them, it was dying. She pushed through a curtain of low-hanging branches and found herself on a narrow deer path that wound deeper into the forbidden territory. The air grew cooler here, thick with the scent of moss and decay. Ancient oaks towered overhead, their branches creating a canopy so dense that midday felt like twilight. Maya followed the path for what felt like an eternity, her heart hammering against her ribs. The sounds had stopped entirely now, and she began to fear she was too late. Just as she was about to turn back, she saw her. A magnificent gray wolf lay motionless beside a fallen log, her silver coat stained dark with blood. Maya's breath caught in her throat. This was no ordinary wolf. Even in death, the creature radiated a regal bearing that spoke of noble bloodlines. This had to be one of the Alpha King's prized wolves, the ones said to be as intelligent as humans and twice as loyal. But it was the 3 tiny forms huddled against the wolf's still flank that made Maya's heart shatter. Pups. Newborn by the look of them, their eyes still sealed shut, their small bodies trembling with cold and weakness. One was black as midnight, another pale as winter frost, and the third bore markings of deep amber that reminded Maya of glowing embers. They were beautiful, perfect, and utterly helpless. Maya dropped to her knees beside them, her hands hovering uncertainly over the small bodies. They were barely breathing, their tiny chests rising and falling in rapid, shallow gasps. Without their mother's warmth, they wouldn't survive another hour. The sound of hoofbeats on hard-packed earth made Maya's head snap up in terror. Through the trees, she could see the flash of a white horse and the glitter of fine fabrics. Someone was coming this way. Someone who had every right to be in these woods while Maya most certainly did not. "Please," Maya whispered to the approaching rider, scrambling to her feet as a figure emerged from the gloom. Cordelia Duskfall sat astride a magnificent white mare, her platinum blonde hair perfectly coiffed despite her morning ride. At 25, she possessed the kind of cold beauty that belonged in marble statues, all sharp angles and glacial blue eyes. Her riding habit was cut from the finest silk, dyed the deep green of royal favor, and her gloved hands held the reins with practiced ease. Behind her rode a small retinue of nobles, their laughter bright and careless in the morning air. They were dressed for pleasure, not work, their faces flushed with the joy of those who had never known real hardship. "My lady," Maya called out, her voice cracking with desperation. "Please, I need your help. The wolf, she's given birth, but she's died in the process. Her pups, they're dying too. If we don't do something now." Cordelia's gaze swept over the scene with the disinterest of someone examining a mildly irritating obstacle in her path. Her cold blue eyes lingered on Maya's simple dress and worn cloak before moving to the dead wolf and her failing offspring. "Dead animals are no concern of mine," Cordelia said, her voice carrying the crisp accent of the noble class. "I have more pressing matters to attend to. The ladies of House Silverbrook have planned a delightful breakfast celebration, and I refuse to be late for such frivolities." "But my lady, they're just babies," Maya pleaded, gesturing toward the pups. "Surely a few moments." "I said no." Cordelia's voice cut through Maya's words like a blade. "Find someone else to clean up nature's messes. I have a reputation to maintain." With that, she spurred her horse forward, her retinue following in a rustle of silk and tinkling laughter. One of the younger nobles glanced back with what might have been sympathy, but none of them stopped. Within moments, they had disappeared entirely, leaving Maya alone with the dying pups. "Heartless witch," Maya muttered under her breath, then immediately felt guilty for the harsh words. But as she knelt beside the pups again, watching their small bodies grow weaker by the moment, anger burned hot in her chest. Maya gathered the 3 tiny forms against her, trying to share what warmth she could. Their fur was softer than silk, but she could feel how thin they were, how their small bones pressed against her palms. They barely stirred at her touch. "I don't know what to do," she whispered, tears threatening to spill down her cheeks. "I don't know how to save you." That was when it happened. A strange warmth began to build in her chest, spreading outward through her arms and into her hands. Maya gasped, nearly dropping the pups in surprise. The sensation was unlike anything she had ever experienced, like sunlight flowing through her veins. Her hands began to glow with a soft, golden light. Maya stared in shock at her own palms, certain she must be hallucinating from grief and fear. But the glow remained, pulsing gently in rhythm with her heartbeat. And beneath her glowing hands, something impossible was happening. The pups' breathing began to deepen and strengthen. Color returned to their tiny noses and paw pads. The smallest one, the amber-marked pup she would later name Ember, let out a tiny yip of protest as strength flowed back into his small body. Maya's grandmother's voice whispered through her memory like a ghost. "The Vexbane bloodline carries old magic, child. Ancient gifts from the time when humans and wolves walked as equals under the moon's blessing. But such gifts come with a price, and the world has grown cruel to those who bear them." As the pups stirred to full, healthy life beneath her touch, Maya finally understood what her grandmother had meant. The old woman's stories hadn't been mere tales after all. The strange mark on Maya's shoulder, the crescent-shaped birthmark she had always hidden beneath her clothes, suddenly seemed to pulse with its own inner light. Power flowed through her like molten gold, more intoxicating than the finest wine. But even as she marveled at what she could do, fear crept cold fingers around her heart. Magic like this was the stuff of legends, and in the kingdom of Lightmere, legends had a way of getting their bearers killed. The pups mewed softly, their cries no longer weak with approaching death but strong with renewed life. Maya held them close, her mind racing. She had to get them to safety, had to find a way to care for them until they could fend for themselves. But how could she explain their sudden recovery? How could she account for their presence without admitting to trespassing in the royal forest? More importantly, how long would it be before someone noticed that her touch could bring the dying back to life? As Maya carefully gathered the 3 pups into her satchel and began the long walk back to her humble cottage, she couldn't shake the feeling that this moment had changed everything. The golden light had faded from her hands, but she could still feel the power humming beneath her skin, waiting to be called upon again. Behind her, in the gloom of the ancient forest, the body of the mother wolf lay still and cold, but her children lived. their small hearts beating strong and sure against Maya's chest. And somewhere deep in her bones, Maya knew that the Alpha King would return soon from his diplomatic mission to find his precious wolf dead and her offspring mysteriously vanished. She could only pray that when that moment came, she would be ready for the consequences. Chapter 2. Awakening Magic. Maya's hands trembled as she pushed open the door to her modest cottage, the 3 wolf pups cradled carefully against her chest. The small dwelling felt even tinier with the weight of her secret pressing down upon her. Rough-hewn stone walls that had once seemed cozy now felt like a prison, and the familiar scent of dried herbs hanging from the rafters couldn't mask the wild, earthy smell that clung to the pup's fur. She had never felt so alone. The cottage sat at the very edge of the village, where civilized fields gave way to wild grasslands. It had been her grandmother's home before it became hers, and before that, her great-grandmother's. 3 generations of Vexbane women had walked these floors, tended the herb garden out back, and kept their family's secrets buried deep. Maya settled the pups on a pile of soft furs near the stone hearth, her heart racing as she watched them stretch and yawn with newborn contentment. They were beautiful, more beautiful than any natural wolves she had ever seen. Their fur held an almost otherworldly luster, and their eyes, though still sealed shut, seemed to pulse with inner light, and they were growing. Even in the short journey from the forest to her cottage, Maya could swear they had grown larger, their growth seemingly fueled by the lingering magic in her touch, a phenomenon her grandmother's tales had hinted could bend nature's pace, their breathing deeper and stronger than should have been possible for creatures so newly born. "What have I done?" she whispered, sinking onto the rough wooden stool beside the hearth. The largest pup, the one with fur black as a moonless night, stretched and made a small sound of contentment. Maya found herself reaching out to stroke his tiny head, and the moment her fingers made contact with his fur, that strange warmth flowed through her again. The pup's eyes snapped open, revealing irises of startling silver that seemed far too intelligent for a newborn. Maya jerked her hand back, but it was too late. The other 2 pups were stirring as well, their eyes opening to reveal colors that defied nature. The pale one's eyes were the blue-white of winter ice, while the amber-marked pup gazed at her with eyes like liquid gold. "This isn't possible," Maya breathed. Wolf pups aren't supposed to open their eyes for weeks, but even as she spoke the words, she knew she was lying to herself. Nothing about this situation was natural. The power that had flowed through her hands in the forest, the way the dying pups had responded to her touch, the strange heat that now seemed to live beneath her skin, all of it pointed to one terrifying conclusion: magic. Maya rose on unsteady legs and moved to the small chest that sat beneath her single window. Her hands shook as she lifted the lid and pushed aside folded linens to reveal a leather-bound journal, its pages yellow with age. Her grandmother's diary, filled with stories Maya had always assumed were mere fantasy. She carried the journal back to the fire and opened it with reverence, her eyes scanning the familiar handwriting until she found the passage she remembered. "The gift runs in our bloodline like a river runs to the sea," she read aloud, her voice barely above a whisper. "Each generation, the moon goddess chooses one daughter to carry the healing light. But the gift comes with great danger, for humans fear what they cannot understand, and those in power seek to control what they cannot possess." Maya's fingers moved instinctively to her left shoulder, where beneath her simple dress lay the crescent-shaped birthmark she had carried since birth. Her grandmother had always told her it was a blessing from the moon, a sign of their family's ancient connection to the old ways. Now, as she pressed her palm against the mark, she could feel it thrumming with warmth. A soft whine drew her attention back to the pups. The golden-eyed one, the smallest of the 3, was attempting to crawl toward her on legs still too weak to support his weight. Without thinking, Maya reached out and lifted him into her lap. The moment he settled against her, purring like a contented cat, the birthmark on her shoulder blazed with light so bright it showed through the fabric of her dress. The pup's eyes widened, and he made a sound that was almost like recognition. "You know, don't you?" Maya whispered, stroking his soft fur. "You can sense what I am." As if in response, the pup nuzzled against her hand, and Maya felt that incredible warmth flow between them again. But this time, instead of just healing energy, she sensed something else: connection, understanding, as if an invisible thread now bound them together. She looked up to find the other two pups watching her with the same intelligent awareness, their unusual eyes bright with unmistakable affection. Whatever her power had done to save their lives, it had also created a bond between them that ran deeper than mere gratitude. "Storm," she said suddenly, the name rising unbidden from somewhere deep in her heart as she looked at the black pup with silver eyes. "And Frost," she continued, her gaze shifting to the pale one whose blue eyes reminded her of winter mornings. "And you," she said, lifting the golden-eyed pup closer to her face. "You're Ember." The names felt right, as if they had always belonged to these creatures. The pups seemed to approve as well, each one responding to their given name with soft sounds of contentment. As the day wore on, Maya watched in amazement as the pups grew visibly stronger and larger. By midday, they were the size of month-old puppies, and by afternoon, they were attempting to stand on legs that should not have supported them for weeks yet. Every time she touched them, Maya could feel her healing power responding, accelerating their natural development in ways that should have been impossible. The magic flowed through her like honey through warm stone, sweet and natural, and terrifyingly powerful. It wasn't until the sun began to set that reality crashed back down upon her. The sound of a horse's hooves on the cobblestones outside made Maya's blood turn to ice. She rushed to the small window and peered through the thick glass, her heart sinking as she recognized the royal messenger's distinctive blue and silver livery. The man dismounted from his lathered horse and strode toward the village square, a scroll clutched in his gauntleted hand. Maya could hear his booming voice even from this distance. "By order of His Majesty, Alpha King Fenris Stormcrest, all subjects are hereby informed of his imminent return to the Kingdom of Lightmere. The king arrives at dawn tomorrow, having successfully concluded negotiations with the Shadow Realm territories." Maya's knees nearly buckled. Dawn tomorrow. That gave her perhaps 12 hours before the Alpha King discovered his prized wolf was dead and her pups were missing. 12 hours before guards would be sent to question every villager, to search every cottage, to find any trace of the missing royal wolves. She looked down at the three pups, who were now large enough to sit up on their own, and were watching her with those unnaturally intelligent eyes. They seemed to sense her distress, whimpering softly and pressing closer to her legs. "What am I going to do with you?" she whispered, her voice thick with fear. As if in answer, Ember, the golden-eyed pup, padded over to the cottage door and scratched at the wooden surface. When Maya didn't immediately respond, he looked back at her and whined, his meaning clear. They wanted to go home. Even as young as they were, some instinct was calling them back to the castle, back to their rightful place at the Alpha King's side. But if Maya let them go, if she opened that door and watched them disappear into the night, how would she explain their miraculous recovery? How would she account for their impossible growth and development? More importantly, how long would it be before someone connected their healing to her? Maya sank to the floor beside the pups, burying her face in her hands. The weight of her secret felt like a stone in her chest, growing heavier with each passing moment. She thought of her grandmother's warnings, of the stories passed down through generations of Vexbane women about those who had revealed their gifts and paid the ultimate price. But she also thought of the Alpha King, returning home to find his beloved companion dead, and her children vanished. The grief that would follow. The rage, the desperate search for answers. How many innocents would suffer before he found the truth? Outside, she could hear the messenger's voice growing fainter as he moved through the village, spreading word of the king's return. Soon, everyone would know. Soon, the entire kingdom would be holding its breath, waiting for their ruler's homecoming. And somewhere in a clearing deep in the royal forest, the body of a magnificent gray wolf lay cold and still, while her children grew strong and healthy in the cottage of a woman who had just discovered she possessed power beyond her wildest dreams. Maya looked down at the pups, who had curled up together in a pile of warm fur, their strange eyes watching her with absolute trust. Whatever tomorrow brought, whatever consequences followed, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She would protect them with her life. Chapter 3. The Return. Dawn broke gray and cold over the kingdom of Lightmere, the early morning mist clinging to the castle's ancient towers like mourning shrouds. Maya had not slept. She sat huddled by her dying fire, watching the three wolf pups who had grown even larger during the night. They were now the size of young wolves, their intelligence burning bright in eyes that held too much wisdom for their age. Storm, the black pup with silver eyes, lifted his head at the sound of distant hoofbeats echoing across the valley. His ears pricked forward, and a low whine escaped his throat. The other two pups immediately responded, their bodies tensing with what could only be described as longing. They knew. Somehow, they knew their true master was returning. Maya's heart hammered against her ribs as she moved to the small window and peered through the thick glass. In the distance, she could see the royal procession winding its way up the mountain road toward the castle. Even from this distance, she could make out the distinctive black banners of the Alpha King, snapping proudly in the morning breeze. At the head of the procession rode a figure that commanded attention even at this distance. Tall and broad-shouldered, he sat his midnight black destrier with the natural grace of a born warrior. Alpha King Fenris Stormcrest, 28 years old and the most powerful shifter in all the known realms, had returned to his domain. Maya had only seen him once before, during his coronation ceremony 5 years ago, when every subject in the kingdom had been required to witness his ascension to the throne. Even then, from her place among the common folk, she had felt the weight of his presence like a physical force. His black hair had gleamed in the sunlight, and his dark eyes had held intensity that made her feel as though he could see straight through to her soul. Now, as she watched him approach his castle, Maya felt that same overwhelming sense of power reaching across the distance. This was not a man to be trifled with. This was not a man who would forgive easily. Behind her, the pups had begun to pace restlessly, their whines growing more urgent by the moment. Ember, the smallest, but somehow the most determined, padded to the door and scratched at it insistently. "I know you want to go home," Maya whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears. "But if I let you go now, if they find you healthy and grown when you should be dead, what do you think will happen to me?" Storm turned his silver gaze upon her, and for a moment Maya could have sworn she saw understanding there. Not just animal recognition, but something deeper, something almost human. The sound of hoofbeats grew louder, and Maya realized with growing horror that they were not all heading toward the castle. Some of the riders had broken away from the main procession and were making their way down the mountain toward the village. Maya's blood turned to ice as she recognized the purpose of their mission. The Alpha King would want to see his precious Freya immediately upon his return. When he found her body and discovered the missing pups, his first instinct would be to question everyone who lived near the forest, starting with the village herbalist, who had been seen gathering plants in the area just yesterday. "Oh, goddess," Maya breathed, pressing her hands to her mouth. "They're coming here." As if her words had broken some invisible barrier, all 3 pups suddenly bolted for the door. Maya lunged after them, but Storm was too quick. His powerful paws scrambled against the wooden latch until it lifted, and the door swung open with a crash. "No!" Maya cried out, but it was too late. The 3 young wolves burst from her cottage like arrows from a bow, their muscular bodies moving with a speed and grace that belied their young age. Maya ran after them, her bare feet slipping on the dew-wet grass, but they were already disappearing into the forest that bordered her small garden. They were going home, going back to the master they had never truly known, but somehow recognized in their very bones. Maya stood in her doorway, gasping for breath, and watching the last flash of golden fur disappear between the trees. Part of her felt relief. The dangerous secret was out of her hands now. Whatever happened next, she could not be blamed for keeping the king's wolves from him. But another part of her, a part she didn't want to acknowledge, felt as though her heart was being torn from her chest. In the span of a single day and night, those 3 magnificent creatures had become more than just animals she had saved. They had become family. The hoofbeats were getting closer now, and Maya forced herself to move. She had perhaps minutes before the king's guards reached her cottage. Minutes to hide any evidence of what had truly transpired in the royal forest. She rushed back inside and quickly gathered up the furs where the pups had slept, shaking them out and hanging them back on their pegs, as though nothing had happened. She swept the floor where muddy paw prints had marked their passage, and threw the last of her precious firewood onto the dying embers to mask any lingering scents. But even as she worked, Maya knew it was futile. Any shifter with half their natural senses intact would smell the wolves the moment they entered her cottage. The question was whether they would recognize the scent as belonging to the king's missing pups, or simply assume she had encountered wild wolves during her herb gathering. A thunderous pounding on her door made Maya's heart leap into her throat. She smoothed her hair with trembling hands and opened the door to find herself facing 3 of the king's elite guard. They were massive men, all of them bearing the distinctive black and silver of the royal house. Their leader, a grizzled veteran with scars crisscrossing his weathered face, stepped forward with the confidence of a man accustomed to being obeyed without question. Maya Vexbane? His voice was rough as gravel, and his pale blue eyes missed nothing as they swept over her appearance. "Yes, sir," Maya managed, proud that her voice didn't shake. "I am Captain Henrik of the King's Guard. You are to come with us immediately. The Alpha King requires your presence." Maya's knees threatened to buckle. "May I ask why, Captain?" "There has been an incident in the royal forest. We're questioning all villagers who were seen in the area yesterday." Henrik's expression was unreadable, but Maya caught the way his nostrils flared slightly as he caught the scent emanating from her cottage. "You will come now." It wasn't a request. Maya nodded mutely and reached for her cloak, but Henrik caught her wrist in a grip that was just shy of painful. "No cloak," he said quietly. "No delays. The king is not in a patient mood this morning." They escorted her through the village, and Maya was mortified to see curious faces peering from windows and doorways. By evening, everyone would know that Maya Vexbane had been taken to the castle by the King's Guard. The whispers would start immediately, and they would only grow louder with time. The ride to the castle seemed to take an eternity, though Maya knew it could not have been more than an hour. She sat rigidly behind Captain Henrik on his massive warhorse, trying to ignore the knowing looks of the other guards, and the way they kept glancing at her as though they could smell secrets on her skin. When they finally reached the castle gates, Maya's courage nearly deserted her entirely. The ancient fortress rose above them like something from a nightmare, all black stone and sharp angles, its towers reaching toward the sky like grasping fingers. This was a place built for war, not comfort, and everything about it spoke of power and domination. They led her through corridors lined with tapestries depicting great battles and hunting scenes, past rooms filled with weapons and armor, up staircases worn smooth by countless feet. Maya had never been inside the castle before, and she found herself overwhelmed by the sheer size and grandeur of it all. Finally, they stopped before massive oak doors bound with iron. Captain Henrik knocked once, and a voice from within called for them to enter. Maya stepped into the Alpha King's private study, and immediately felt the air leave her lungs in a rush. The room was dominated by a massive fireplace, its flames casting dancing shadows across walls lined with books and maps. Ancient weapons hung from hooks, and the scent of leather and wood smoke filled the air. But it was the man standing with his back to her, staring into the fire, who made Maya's world tilt on its axis. Alpha King Fenris Stormcrest was even more imposing up close than she had imagined. He stood well over 6 feet tall, his broad shoulders filling out a black tunic that had clearly been tailored to accommodate his powerful frame. His dark hair was longer than was fashionable, curling slightly at the nape of his neck. And when he turned to face her, Maya nearly gasped aloud. His eyes were not merely dark, they were black as midnight, and they held a depth of emotion that took her breath away. Grief, rage, and something else. Something that made her skin tingle with awareness. The scar along his left jaw only added to his fierce beauty, and when his gaze locked with hers, Maya felt as though the world had suddenly shifted beneath her feet. "Your Majesty," she managed, dropping into the deepest curtsy she could manage. "Rise," he commanded, and his voice was exactly as she remembered from his coronation. Deep and rich, with an undertone of absolute authority that made every instinct in her body scream submission. Maya straightened, keeping her eyes fixed on the floor, but she could feel his gaze burning into her like a brand. "Tell me, Maya Vexbane," the Alpha King said quietly, "what did you see in my forest yesterday?" The question hung in the air between them like a blade, and Maya knew that her answer would determine not just her own fate, but the fate of the 3 magnificent creatures she had saved and grown to love. Taking a deep breath, she looked up and met the Alpha King's impossible black gaze. "Everything, Your Majesty," she whispered. "I saw everything." Chapter 4. Judgment's Edge. The great hall of Castle Lightmere had been transformed into a court of judgment, its soaring stone walls echoing with whispered conversations as nobles in their finest silks gathered to witness what promised to be a most unusual trial. Torches flickered in iron sconces, casting dancing shadows across ancient tapestries that depicted the kingdom's most legendary hunts and battles. Maya stood in the center of it all, her simple brown dress a stark contrast to the opulence surrounding her. Her wrists were bound with iron shackles that felt heavier than they should, and she could feel every eye in the room boring into her as though they could strip away her secrets by will alone. At the head of the hall, Alpha King Fenris sat upon his throne of black oak and silver, his presence dominating the vast space even in stillness. He had changed from his traveling clothes into formal court attire, and the deep blue velvet of his doublet made his dark eyes seem even more intense. The crown of Lightmere, wrought from silver and set with sapphires, caught the torchlight and cast small rainbows across his angular features. To his right sat Cordelia Duskfall, resplendent in a gown of emerald silk that matched her calculating eyes. Her platinum hair was arranged in an elaborate style befitting her position as Luna, and diamonds glittered at her throat like captured starlight. She watched the proceedings with the cold interest of a predator studying wounded prey. Maya's heart hammered against her ribs as she remembered their encounter in the forest, remembered the cruel dismissal, the casual cruelty. Now Cordelia held the power to spin whatever narrative she chose, and Maya knew with sickening certainty that truth would not be her ally in this place. "Bring forth the accused," commanded the court herald, his voice booming through the hall. Captain Henrik stepped forward, his scarred face impassive as granite. Maya thought she saw the faintest flicker of hesitation in his pale blue eyes, a shadow that unsettled her, though she could not yet name why. "Your Majesty, we present Maya Vexbane, age 22, herbalist of the village. She was found in possession of knowledge regarding the incident in the royal forest." Fenris leaned forward slightly, his black gaze fixed upon Maya with an intensity that made her skin burn. "Tell the court what you told me in my study, Miss Vexbane. Leave nothing out." Maya lifted her chin, drawing upon reserves of courage she hadn't known she possessed. Her voice rang clear and strong through the great hall as she began her tale. "I was gathering herbs at the border of the royal forest when I heard sounds of distress from deeper within. Against all wisdom, I followed them and found a gray wolf, one of great beauty and obvious noble breeding, who had died during childbirth. Her 3 pups were dying in the cold. Murmurs rippled through the crowd like wind through wheat." Maya continued, her brown eyes never leaving the king's face. "I encountered Lady Cordelia and her riding party. I begged for assistance, explaining that without immediate help, the pups would perish. Lady Cordelia informed me that dead animals were no concern of hers, and that she had more pressing social engagements to attend." The murmurs turned to gasps, and Maya saw several nobles turn to stare at Cordelia with expressions of shock. But the Luna's face remained a mask of serene indifference, as though Maya were discussing the weather, rather than the death of the king's most prized companion. Cordelia rose gracefully from her seat, her voice carrying the cultured tones of nobility as she addressed the court. "Your Majesty, I must protest this common woman's attempt to malign my character. I was never approached by this person, nor did I encounter any distressed animals during my morning ride. She seeks to deflect blame for her own crimes by creating elaborate falsehoods." Maya's hands clenched into fists within her shackles. "I speak the truth, Your Majesty. I can describe every detail of Lady Cordelia's attire, her companions, even the white mare she rode, details easily observed from hiding." Cordelia replied smoothly. "This woman was clearly lurking in the forest with ill intent. Perhaps she killed poor Freya herself, hoping to steal the pups for some dark purpose." The accusation hit Maya like a physical blow. Around the hall, she could see nobles nodding in agreement, their faces hardening with suspicion and disgust. Who were they to believe? A Luna of noble blood, or a common village girl with mud still clinging to her skirts? But then, Alpha King Fenris rose from his throne, and the entire hall fell silent, as death. "Enough." His voice cut through the murmurs like a blade through silk. His black eyes swept the assembled court before settling on Maya once more. "You claim to have found my pups dying. Yet when my guards searched your cottage this morning, they found evidence of healthy wolves. The scent was unmistakable. How do you explain this discrepancy?" This was the moment Maya had dreaded most, the moment when she would have to choose between her own life and the truth of what she had become. She thought of her grandmother's warnings, of the generations of Vexbane women who had hidden their gifts to survive. Then she thought of Storm, Frost, and Ember, growing strong and healthy because of her touch. She thought of the golden light that had flowed through her hands, the impossible warmth that had brought them back from the brink of death. Some truths were worth dying for. "They were healthy because I saved them, Your Majesty," Maya said quietly, her voice carrying clearly in the hushed hall. "I have been blessed by the moon goddess with the gift of healing." The silence that followed was deafening. Then someone in the crowd whispered the word that Maya had feared most of her life. "Witch." The word spread through the hall like wildfire. Nobles pressed back against the walls, making signs against evil. Several called for her immediate execution, their voices rising in a crescendo of fear and hatred, but Maya kept her eyes fixed on the Alpha King, watching as emotions warred across his stern features. Disbelief, calculation, and something else, something that made her pulse quicken despite the mortal danger she faced. "Prove it," Fenris commanded, his voice cutting through the chaos. The hall fell silent once more as all eyes turned to Maya. She looked around desperately, searching for some way to demonstrate her power without revealing its true magnitude. Her gaze fell upon an elderly servant who stood near one of the columns, his gnarled hands wrapped around a walking stick. "The man there," Maya said, nodding toward him. "Sir, would you approach?" The servant looked to the king, who gave a curt nod. The old man hobbled forward, his limp pronounced and clearly painful. Maya had seen similar injuries before, the legacy of old battles or hard labor. "What is your name, sir?" Maya asked gently. "Willem, miss. Willem of the Castle Guard, retired these 20 years past." Maya could see the pain etched in every line of his weathered face, could smell the herbs he used to dull the constant ache in his joints. "Your leg troubles you greatly, does it not?" Willem nodded, confusion clear in his rheumy eyes. "Aye, miss. Took a sword thrust in the king's service long ago. Never healed proper, it didn't." "May I?" Maya held up her shackled hands. The old man glanced at the king, who watched with the intensity of a hawk studying its prey. At Fenris's slight nod, Willem extended his injured leg. Maya knelt as best she could with her bound hands and pressed her palms against Willem's thigh, just above where she knew the old wound must lie. The familiar warmth began to build in her chest, spreading down through her arms and into her hands. Golden light began to seep between her fingers, soft at first, then growing stronger. Willem's eyes widened in shock as the light engulfed his leg, and Maya felt the familiar rush of power as her gift responded to his need. Scar tissue softened and dissolved. Damaged muscle fibers knit themselves back together. Old pain that had lived in Willem's bones for decades simply melted away like snow in spring sunshine. Maya pulled her hands back, and Willem stared down at his leg in wonder. Tentatively, he put his full weight on it, then took a step without his walking stick. Then another. The limp that had defined his gait for 20 years was completely gone. "Blessed mother of wolves," Willem breathed, tears streaming down his cheeks. I can walk. I can walk without pain for the first time in decades." The great hall erupted in chaos. Some nobles fell to their knees in religious awe, while others backed toward the exits in terror. Arguments broke out between those who saw Maya as blessed and those who viewed her as cursed. But Maya saw none of it. Her attention was fixed entirely on Alpha King Fenris, who had risen from his throne and was staring at her with an expression she couldn't begin to interpret. His black eyes seemed to burn with inner fire, and she could smell something on the air, something wild and dangerous, and utterly masculine. It was then that the ancient doors at the back of the hall burst open with a resounding crash. Through them bounded 3 magnificent wolves, their coats gleaming with unnatural luster, their eyes bright with intelligence and joy. Storm, Frost, and Ember had found their way home. They raced through the stunned crowd, ignoring the screams and scrambling nobles, their attention focused solely on the Alpha King, who stood frozen at the head of the hall. But as they approached the dais, something unexpected happened. Instead of going to their rightful master, all 3 wolves skidded to a halt before Maya. Storm pressed his massive head against her hip, while Frost and Ember flanked her protectively. Their lips pulled back in silent snarls as they faced the assembled court. The message was unmistakable. These royal wolves, bred for generations to serve only the Alpha bloodline, had chosen a new master. They had chosen her. Maya looked up to meet Fenris's gaze across the length of the hall, and in his black eyes she saw the exact moment when everything changed. Recognition flared between them like lightning, accompanied by something deeper. something that made her breath catch and her heart race. The mate bond, ancient and undeniable, snapped into place between them with the force of destiny itself. Impossible. Cordelia breathed from her place beside the throne, her perfect composure finally cracking. But Fenris seemed not to hear her. His voice, when he spoke, was rough with emotion and absolute authority. Clear the hall. Now. Chapter 5. Castle Shadows. 3 weeks had passed since Maya Vexbane had been granted sanctuary within the walls of Castle Lightmere, and she still felt like an intruder in a world of silk and silver. Her quarters were modest but comfortable. A small chamber in the tower that housed the castle's healers and scholars, with a narrow window that overlooked the sprawling forest where this all began. She spent her days in the company of Master Aldwin, the ancient keeper of knowledge who had taken it upon himself to help her understand the magnitude of her abilities. His beard was white as fresh snow, and his pale green eyes held depths of wisdom that spoke of centuries spent studying the old ways. "Focus, child," he instructed as Maya knelt beside a young page who had taken a nasty fall from his horse during training. The boy's arm was clearly broken, the bone jutting against his skin in a way that made several onlookers turn away in disgust. "Feel the injury. Understand its nature before you attempt to heal it." Maya placed her hands gently over the break, closing her eyes and extending her senses as Aldwin had taught her. The familiar warmth began to build in her chest, spreading down through her arms like liquid sunlight. But now, instead of simply pouring her power into the wound, she took time to examine what she found there. The break was clean, thankfully, with no fragments that would complicate the healing. She could sense the boy's pain, sharp and immediate, but also his young body's natural desire to mend itself. Her gift simply accelerated what nature intended, guiding bone back to bone, encouraging torn muscle to knit together. The golden light that emanated from her palms was softer now, more controlled than it had been in those first desperate moments in the forest. Under Aldwin's tutelage, she was learning to modulate her power, to heal without exhausting herself completely. When she opened her eyes, the boy was flexing his fingers with wonder, the arm that had been broken now whole and strong once more. "Blessed Mother," breathed one of the watching servants. "It's like watching the gods at work." Maya smiled gently at the page, helping him to his feet. "How does it feel, Thomas?" "Perfect, my lady," the boy replied, his voice filled with awe. It's as though it never happened at all. Word of Maya's abilities had spread through the castle like wildfire, despite the Alpha King's attempts to keep the knowledge contained. Servants whispered of miracles in the corridors, and more than once Maya had been approached by those seeking healing for ailments both great and small. She helped where she could, always under Aldwin's careful supervision, but she was acutely aware of the division her presence was causing within the castle walls. Some saw her as a gift from the moon goddess, a healer sent in their hour of greatest need with war threatening their borders. Others viewed her with suspicion and fear, crossing themselves when she passed, and muttering prayers against dark magic. And then there was Cordelia. The Luna had grown increasingly cold toward Maya since that day in the Great Hall, her emerald eyes following the younger woman's movements with barely concealed hostility. Maya could feel the weight of that calculating gaze whenever they occupied the same space. And sometimes, when Cordelia passed too close, Maya swore she caught the faintest trace of sulfur in the air. Though she dismissed it as imagination, could sense the dangerous currents swirling beneath Cordelia's perfect composure. But it was Fenris who occupied most of Maya's thoughts during the long hours of darkness. The Alpha King had been scrupulously polite since granting her sanctuary, but Maya could feel the tension that crackled between them whenever they were in the same room. The mate bond that had flared to life between them in the Great Hall still pulsed with every heartbeat, a constant reminder of the connection neither of them dared acknowledge openly. He was bound to Cordelia by the laws of pack and kingdom, married in a ceremony that had been witnessed by thousands. Maya was a commoner, a woman whose very existence threatened the political stability his reign depended upon. No matter what her heart might whisper in the darkness, she knew there could be no future between them. Still, she found herself watching for glimpses of him as she moved through the castle. She learned his routines, the times when he would cross the courtyard on his way to the training yards, the moments when he might appear in the corridor outside the library, where she often studied with Aldwin. Storm, Frost, and Ember had remained by her side throughout her time at the castle, their loyalty absolute and unwavering. They had grown even larger, now the size of full adult wolves, their intelligence continuing to develop in ways that amazed everyone who encountered them. They seemed to understand not just her words but her emotions, offering comfort when her heart grew heavy and protection when she sensed danger. It was on a gray afternoon, with rain lashing against the windows of the castle, that Maya's careful peace was finally shattered. She was returning from the herb gardens, her basket filled with plants needed for the healing potions Aldwin had taught her to brew, when she noticed Storm's hackles rising. The great black wolf pressed close to her side, a low growl rumbling in his chest as his silver eyes fixed on something in the shadows ahead. Maya followed his gaze and felt her blood turn to ice. 3 men stepped from the darkness of an alcove, their faces hidden by deep hoods, but their intentions clear from the gleam of steel in their hands. "Now!" one of them hissed, and they rushed forward with the coordinated precision of trained killers. Maya dropped her basket and ran, her heart hammering against her ribs as she heard the assassin's footsteps pounding behind her. Storm, Frost, and Ember flanked her, their snarls echoing off the stone walls as they prepared to defend their chosen mistress with their lives. The corridor seemed to stretch endlessly before her, each doorway a potential trap, each shadow hiding possible enemies. Maya's mind raced as she tried to remember the castle's layout, searching for some route that might lead to safety. Behind her, she heard the distinctive sound of steel meeting claw as her wolves engaged the attackers. Storm's roar of fury was answered by a man's scream of pain, but Maya didn't dare look back. She had to reach help, had to find someone who could. A figure stepped from the shadows directly in front of her, and Maya skidded to a halt, certain her death had finally found her. But instead of another assassin, she found herself face to face with Alpha King Fenris himself. His black eyes took in the scene instantly, the sounds of battle behind her, the terror written across her features. Without a word, he swept her behind him, his body forming a protective barrier between her and the approaching danger. "Guards!" His voice boomed through the corridor, carrying the full weight of his alpha authority. "To me!" The response was immediate. Armed men poured from every doorway, their weapons drawn and ready. The remaining assassins, seeing themselves outnumbered, attempted to flee, but they were cut down before they could reach the nearest exit. In the sudden silence that followed, Maya became aware of her body pressed against Fenris's back, could feel the tension in his powerful frame, could smell his scent of pine and leather, and something indefinably masculine that made her head spin. "Are you hurt?" he asked, turning to face her. His hands cupped her face with surprising gentleness, his dark eyes searching for any sign of injury. Maya shook her head, not trusting her voice. The mate bond between them was singing now, responding to his touch, to his protective instincts, to the way he was looking at her as though she were the most precious thing in his world. "The wolves?" Fenris asked, his gaze moving to where Storm was limping toward them. A shallow cut along his flank, the only evidence of the battle. "They protected me," Maya whispered, finally finding her voice. "They saved my life." Fenris's jaw tightened, his expression growing thunderous. "Someone will answer for this. I gave you my protection, and it was violated within my own walls." He turned to Captain Henrik, who had arrived with the guards. "Double the watch on Miss Vexbane's quarters. I want to know who these men were and who sent them." As the captain began organizing his men, Fenris drew Maya aside, his voice dropping to a tone meant for her ears alone. "I should have anticipated this," he said, his black eyes dark with self-recrimination. "Your presence here has made you a target. There are those who see your abilities as a threat to the natural order." Maya looked up at him, seeing past the Alpha King to the man beneath. "You cannot protect me from the entire world, Your Majesty." "I can try," he replied, and there was something in his voice, something raw and honest that made Maya's breath catch. For a moment, they stood there in the shadowed corridor, surrounded by the aftermath of violence, and Maya felt the full weight of what lay between them, the impossible attraction, the bond that pulled at her very soul, the future that could never be. Then Cordelia's voice cut through the moment, like a blade through silk. "How convenient," the Luna said, her tone dripping with false concern as she approached with a rustle of fine fabrics. "Another attack on our dear healer, just when my husband happens to be passing by to rescue her." Maya felt Fenris stiffen beside her, saw the way his expression closed off as duty reasserted itself. The moment was broken, but the memory of it would burn in Maya's heart like a brand. "Perhaps," Cordelia continued, her cold gaze fixed on Maya, "it would be safer for everyone if Miss Vexbane were relocated somewhere more secure. Somewhere away from the castle entirely. The threat was clear, wrapped though it was in honeyed words. Maya lifted her chin, meeting Cordelia's hostile stare with quiet dignity. "I serve at the pleasure of the Alpha King," she said carefully. "If His Majesty believes I would be safer elsewhere, I will of course comply with his wishes." Fenris was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes moving between his wife and the woman who had somehow claimed a piece of his soul. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "Maya Vexbane will remain under my protection within these walls. Any who seek to harm her will answer to me personally." It was both a promise and a warning, and Maya felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with her healing abilities, and everything to do with the fierce protectiveness she heard in his voice. But as Cordelia's lips curved in a smile that never reached her eyes, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that the real danger had yet to reveal itself. Chapter 6. Betrayal's Web. The parchment crackled between Maya's trembling fingers as she read the damning words by flickering candlelight. Hidden in the depths of Cordelia's private chambers Maya could enter only because Aldwin had quietly taught her of the healer's secret passageways built for emergencies. Surrounded by silk tapestries and golden ornaments, Maya felt like a thief stealing something far more precious than jewels. She was stealing truth. The letter, written in Cordelia's elegant script, was addressed to someone called Lord Commander Vex of the Shadow Realm, and its contents made Maya's blood run cold. The healer grows stronger each day, as does the king's attachment to her. Our original timeline must be accelerated. When the demon forces breach the eastern border as planned, ensure that the king's attention is fully occupied. I will handle the rest from within the castle walls. The Duskfall family has waited generations for this opportunity to claim the throne of Lightmere. Soon, my lord. Very soon. Maya's hands shook as she photographed the letter with her mind, memorizing every damning word. Around her, Cordelia's private study spoke of wealth and privilege, but now Maya could see the darker truth hidden beneath the beauty. Maps of Lightmere's defenses lay spread across an ornate desk, marked with notes in the same elegant handwriting. Battle plans, weaknesses in the kingdom's borders, detailed information about troop movements, all of it ready to be passed to enemies who would use it to destroy everything Fenris had worked to protect. The sound of approaching footsteps made Maya's heart leap into her throat. She quickly returned the letter to its hiding place within a false bottom of Cordelia's jewelry box and slipped behind the heavy velvet curtains that framed the chamber's tall windows. The door opened with a soft whisper of hinges, and Cordelia entered, her emerald silk gown rustling with each graceful step. Even in the privacy of her own chambers, she maintained the perfect posture and composed expression of nobility. But Maya could see something else now, something she had missed before. There was a coldness in Cordelia's pale blue eyes, a calculating cruelty that spoke of someone capable of unspeakable acts. Cordelia moved to her writing desk and began composing another letter, her quill scratching across parchment with deliberate precision. Maya strained to see what she was writing, but the angle was wrong, the distance too great. A soft knock at the door interrupted Cordelia's work. "Enter," she called, her voice carrying the imperious tone she used with servants. Captain Henrik stepped into the chamber, his scarred face grim in the candlelight. Maya's breath caught in her throat. What was the king's most trusted guard doing here, meeting secretly with the Luna? "Report," Cordelia commanded without looking up from her writing. "The healer grows suspicious," Henrik said, his gravelly voice carrying an undertone Maya had never heard before. "She asks too many questions about castle security, about the guard rotations. She may have discovered something." Maya pressed her hand to her mouth to stifle a gasp. Henrik, the man Fenris trusted above all others, was working with Cordelia. The betrayal cut deep, but Maya forced herself to remain still, to listen. "Then we accelerate our timeline," Cordelia replied, finally setting down her quill. "Is everything prepared for tomorrow night?" "The men are in position. When the king attends the War Council meeting, they will make their move. The healer will be taken to the dungeons and charged with treason. The evidence we've planted in her chambers will be discovered, and her guilt will be unquestionable." Maya's heart hammered against her ribs. They were going to frame her, make it appear as though she was the one betraying the kingdom to their enemies. With her reputation already suspect due to her magical abilities, many would be all too willing to believe such accusations. "And the king?" Cordelia asked, rising from her desk with fluid grace. will be devastated by the betrayal of someone he trusted. In his grief and rage, he'll be more malleable, easier to manipulate. Your position as his sole confidant will be secured." Cordelia smiled, and the expression was beautiful and terrible at the same time. Perfect. And if he proves difficult to control? Henrik's hand moved to the hilt of his sword. Then the kingdom will mourn the loss of another king to tragic circumstances. You will rule as regent until a suitable heir can be found. The casual way they discussed murdering Fenris made Maya's stomach churn with rage and terror. This was not just political ambition. This was betrayal of the deepest kind, orchestrated by the very people Fenris trusted most. "There is one complication," Henrik continued. "The wolves. They remain loyal to the healer, and they're unnaturally intelligent. If we move against her, they'll try to protect her. Then ensure they're dealt with as well," Cordelia said dismissively. "Claim they attacked you in defense of their traitorous mistress. No one will question the death of dangerous beasts." Maya bit her lips so hard she tasted blood. Storm, Frost, and Ember, the magnificent creatures she had saved and grown to love, would be murdered simply for their loyalty to her. She had to warn Fenris, had to find some way to expose the conspiracy before it was too late. But even as the thought formed, Maya realized the impossibility of her situation. Who would believe her accusations against the Luna and the captain of the guard? Her word as a common-born healer against that of nobility and established authority. The meeting concluded with Henrik bowing stiffly to Cordelia before departing. The Luna returned to her desk, humming softly as she continued her correspondence with the kingdom's enemies. Maya waited until she was certain Cordelia was fully absorbed in her work, before slipping from behind the curtains and making her way toward the door. Her heart pounded so loudly she was certain it would give her away, but Cordelia remained focused on her treacherous letters. Just as Maya's hand touched the door handle, Cordelia's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "Going somewhere, dear Maya?" Maya froze, her blood turning to ice in her veins. Slowly she turned to find Cordelia watching her with those cold blue eyes, a knowing smile playing about her perfect lips. "I was merely looking for you, my lady," Maya said, proud that her voice remained steady despite the terror coursing through her. "Master Aldwin sent me to inquire about your headaches. He has prepared a new remedy." Cordelia rose from her desk with predatory grace, moving closer to Maya like a cat stalking a mouse. "How thoughtful. And tell me, did you find what you were looking for?" The question was loaded with meaning, and Maya knew that her life hung in the balance of her next words. "I'm afraid I don't understand, my lady." "Oh, I think you understand perfectly." Cordelia's smile never wavered, but Maya could see the deadly intent in her eyes. "You see, dear, I know you've been watching me, following me, asking questions about my activities. Did you really think I wouldn't notice?" Maya's mind raced, searching for some escape, some way to salvage the situation. But Cordelia continued speaking, her voice taking on a sing-song quality that made Maya's skin crawl. Poor little healer, so desperate to protect her precious king, so willing to risk everything for a man who will never truly be hers. Cordelia circled Maya like a predator, her silk gown whispering against the stone floor. "You love him, don't you? That's what makes this so delicious." "I serve the crown," Maya said carefully. "Nothing more." Cordelia laughed, the sound light and musical and utterly terrifying. "Please, child. I can smell the mate bond on you both. It's quite pathetic, really, the way you moon after him, knowing he can never be yours." Maya's composure finally cracked. "At least I'm not betraying him to his enemies." The words hung in the air between them, and Maya immediately knew she had made a fatal mistake. Cordelia's smile widened, showing teeth that seemed too sharp for humanity. "So you did find something interesting. How wonderful." Cordelia clapped her hands together like a delighted child. "Guards!" The door burst open, and armed men poured into the chamber. Not castle guards, Maya realized with growing horror, but soldiers bearing the dark insignia of the Shadow Realm. The enemy was already within the walls. "Seize her," Cordelia commanded. "Our little spy has served her purpose. It's time for her to take her place in the dungeons, where she'll await trial for treason against the crown." Maya tried to run, but there were too many of them. Strong hands seized her arms, binding them with iron shackles that burned against her skin. She tried to call out, to scream for help, but a cloth was forced over her mouth, muffling her cries. As they dragged her from the chamber, Maya caught one last glimpse of Cordelia, who was already returning to her desk to complete her letters to the kingdom's enemies. "Give my regards to the rats," Cordelia called sweetly. "I'm sure you'll find the dungeons quite educational." The last thing Maya saw before they dragged her into the darkness was Cordelia's cold smile, beautiful and terrible as a winter storm. In the depths of the castle, Storm, Frost, and Ember lifted their heads in unison, their hackles rising as they sensed their mistress's distress. Their howls echoed through the stone corridors, a mournful sound that spoke of loyalty betrayed and love endangered. But it was already too late. The trap had been sprung, and Maya was caught in its merciless jaws. Chapter 7. Fire and Darkness. The dungeons of Castle Lightmere were carved from the living rock beneath the fortress, their walls weeping with moisture and age. Maya had been thrown into the deepest cell, where the darkness was so complete it seemed to have weight and substance of its own. The iron shackles around her wrists had been forged with silver, burning her skin and somehow dampening the healing power that usually flowed so freely through her. She had lost track of time in this place, where day and night meant nothing. Hours could have passed, or days. The only sounds were the distant dripping of water and the scurrying of rats through hidden passages in the stone. Maya pressed her back against the cold wall and tried to marshal her strength. The silver in her bonds was weakening her, but she could still feel the power deep within, like embers waiting to be fanned into flame. If she could focus, if she could overcome the pain. The golden light began as barely a flicker beneath her skin, growing stronger as she concentrated. The silver burned like fire where it touched her, but Maya gritted her teeth and pushed through the agony. The light spread from her heart down through her arms, and she felt the bonds begin to weaken, the metal growing brittle under the assault of her magical energy. With a sound like breaking bells, the shackles shattered, falling to the stone floor in pieces. Maya gasped, her wrists raw and bleeding, but free at last. The healing power surged through her, mending the worst of the damage, though she remained weak from the prolonged contact with silver. Above her, she could hear the sounds of battle, the clash of steel on steel, the shouting of men, the roar of creatures that didn't sound entirely human. Cordelia's allies from the Shadow Realm had begun their assault on the castle. Maya made her way carefully through the dungeon corridors, her bare feet silent on the damp stone. She had to find Fenris, had to warn him of the betrayal that surrounded him. But first, she needed to arm herself. The guard post at the entrance to the dungeons was empty, its occupants presumably called away to defend the castle above. Maya found a cloak to cover her torn dress and a small dagger that would have to serve as her only weapon. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. The sounds of battle grew louder as she climbed the winding stairs that led from the dungeons to the main levels of the castle. She could smell smoke now, acrid and choking, and the orange glow of fire flickered against the walls. Maya emerged into chaos. The great hall was a war zone, with castle guards fighting desperately against invaders whose skin bore the ashen pallor of the Shadow Realm. These were not entirely human, she realized with horror. Their eyes glowed with hellfire, and their movements held an inhuman fluidity that spoke of demonic enhancement. Through the melee, she caught sight of a familiar black shape moving with deadly purpose. Storm was there, his massive form tearing through enemy soldiers with savage efficiency. Frost and Ember fought beside him, their loyalty absolute even in the face of overwhelming odds. "Storm!" Maya called out, and the great wolf's silver eyes found hers across the battlefield. Relief and joy flashed in his gaze, and he began fighting his way toward her, his powerful jaws crushing any enemy that stood in his path. A Shadow Realm soldier noticed Maya's presence and turned toward her, his weapon raised and his demonic features twisted with killing intent. Maya raised her small dagger, knowing it would be inadequate against his superior size and strength. But before he could reach her, Storm was there, his massive body slamming into the soldier and bearing him to the ground. The wolf's jaws closed around the enemy's throat, and the threat was ended with brutal efficiency. "Where is the king?" Maya asked, her hands buried in Storm's thick fur. The wolf's eyes turned toward the upper levels of the castle, and Maya understood. Fenris was fighting on multiple fronts, trying to defend his people and his home against enemies who had infiltrated his very household. Maya and her 3 protectors fought their way through the castle, following the sounds of the fiercest combat. They found Fenris in the throne room, surrounded by the bodies of fallen enemies, his black hair wild and his clothing torn. He moved with the fluid grace of a born warrior, his sword singing through the air as he held off wave after wave of attackers. But Maya could see that he was tiring. Even an alpha king had limits, and he had been fighting for hours against overwhelming odds. Blood streaked his arms and face, and his breathing was labored. Worse, Captain Henrik was there, fighting at Fenris's side with apparent loyalty, while Maya knew the truth of his betrayal. She watched in horror as Henrik maneuvered closer to the king, his sword raised as though to defend, but Maya could see the killing intent in his eyes. "Fenris!" Maya screamed in warning, but her voice was lost in the din of battle. Henrik's blade swept around in a deadly arc, aimed at Fenris's unprotected back. The king, trusting his captain implicitly, never saw the betrayal coming. Maya didn't think. She ran forward, pushing through the melee with desperate urgency. The healing power blazed through her like wildfire, and she reached out with both hands, golden light streaming from her fingers. The light struck Henrik just as his blade was about to find its target. The treacherous captain screamed as the healing energy invaded his body, but instead of mending, it began to burn. Maya's power, twisted by her rage and desperate need to protect, became something else entirely. Something that could destroy as well as heal. Henrik's scream cut through the noise of battle as he crumpled to the floor, his weapon falling from nerveless fingers. Around the throne room, the fighting paused, as both sides stared in shock at what Maya had done. Fenris turned, his black eyes wide with amazement, and something deeper. Relief, gratitude, and beneath it all, the mate bond that flared between them like lightning. But their moment of connection was shattered as Cordelia entered the throne room, flanked by her remaining soldiers. She had abandoned all pretense now, her beautiful face twisted with rage and ambition. Dark energy swirled around her like smoke, and Maya could see her true nature at last. Cordelia was no mere human noble. She was something else, something that had been hiding among them for years, waiting for this moment. "How touching," Cordelia purred, her voice carrying an otherworldly resonance that made the air itself shiver. The little healer and her king, together at last. "It's almost romantic, if it weren't so pathetic." As she spoke, Cordelia began to change. Her flawless skin took on an ashen pallor, and her platinum hair darkened to the color of shadows. Her fingernails lengthened into claws, and when she smiled, her teeth were sharp as razors. "You see, dear husband," she continued, her form continuing to shift and change. "You never married a human woman at all. You bound yourself to a demon, and through me, the Shadow Realm has had access to all your secrets, all your defenses, all your weaknesses." Fenris's face went white with horror and rage. "The marriage contract. It was signed before the moon goddess herself. How is this possible?" Cordelia laughed, the sound like breaking glass. "Because I am not bound by your petty mortal laws. The Duskfall family has served the Shadow Realm for generations, and I am the culmination of centuries of careful breeding and planning. I am what happens when demon blood runs pure." The revelation hit Maya like a physical blow. All of Fenris's pain, all of his loneliness within his own marriage, had been orchestrated by enemies who had infiltrated his very bed. "But enough talking," Cordelia said, raising her hands. Dark energy began to coalesce around her fingers, crackling with malevolent power. "It's time to end this farce and claim what is rightfully mine." She launched the attack at Fenris, but Maya was faster. She threw herself between them, her own power blazing to life as she met darkness with light. The collision sent shockwaves through the throne room, shattering ancient stone and toppling pillars. Maya felt Cordelia's power trying to invade her mind, seeking to corrupt and destroy from within. But the healing light that was her gift proved stronger than the demon's malice. Where darkness touched light, it withered and burned away like mist before the sun. "Impossible," Cordelia snarled, her perfect composure finally cracking. "You're nothing but a human peasant with a minor healing gift." "She's my mate," Fenris said, moving to stand beside Maya. His own power, the ancient authority of the Alpha bloodline, joined with hers, creating a barrier of pure force that made the demons step back. "And together, we are going to end your reign of lies." The final battle began in earnest then, light against darkness, truth against deception, love against the corruption that had poisoned the kingdom of Lightmere for far too long. Maya felt her power surge beyond anything she had ever experienced. amplified by the mate bond and by her desperate need to protect the man she loved. Beside her, Fenris fought with the fury of a king betrayed, his sword cutting through shadow soldiers as though they were made of smoke. Storm, Frost, and Ember joined the battle, their loyalty absolute as they defended their chosen family against all enemies. But it was Maya's power that proved decisive. The healing light that flowed from her hands was no longer gentle and restorative. It was purifying fire, burning away the darkness that had infected her new home and threatening to consume anyone who stood against the rightful order. Cordelia's screams echoed through the castle as Maya's power stripped away her demonic enhancements, leaving her diminished and mortal once more. The Shadow Realm soldiers, their connection to their mistress severed, began to flee or surrender. As dawn broke over the kingdom of Lightmere, the battle was won. The castle was free, the enemies routed, and the traitors exposed. Maya stood in the ruins of the throne room, exhausted but victorious, her hand clasped tightly in Fenris's as they surveyed the damage and began to plan for rebuilding. The mate bond between them pulsed with satisfaction and promise, no longer something to be denied or hidden, but embraced as the foundation of a new and better future for them all. Chapter 8. Dawn of the Luna Queen. 1 year later, the gardens of Castle Lightmere bloomed with a beauty that had not been seen in generations. Where once there had been only practical herb beds and defensive barriers, now flowers of every color imaginable created a tapestry of natural wonder that drew visitors from across the known realms. Maya walked slowly through the pathways she had designed, her hand resting on the gentle curve of her belly, where new life grew beneath her heart. The morning sun cast golden light across the healing academy that had been built where the old dungeons once stood. Young men and women from every corner of the kingdom came here to study under Maya's guidance, learning to channel the gifts the moon goddess had bestowed upon them. The sound of their laughter and earnest discussions drifted through the open windows, a symphony of hope that filled Maya's heart with contentment. "My queen," called a familiar voice, and Maya turned to see Master Aldwin approaching, his ancient face creased with a smile. In the year since the battle that had freed Lightmere from Cordelia's deception, the elderly scholar had become like a grandfather to her, his wisdom and gentle humor a constant source of comfort. "Master Aldwin," Maya replied, her own smile radiant as she embraced him. "How fare our newest students?" "Eager as spring colts and twice as energetic," he chuckled, his pale green eyes twinkling with amusement. "Young Thomas has managed to heal a broken wing on a sparrow this morning, though I suspect the bird was more frightened by his enthusiasm than grateful for the mending." Maya laughed, the sound carrying across the gardens like music. Thomas, the same page whose arm she had healed in those first uncertain days, had discovered his own healing gift and now studied with passionate dedication. He was not alone. In the wake of the Shadow Realm's defeat, it seemed as though the moon goddess had awakened dormant abilities throughout the kingdom, as if the darkness had been holding back a tide of light that now flowed freely. "And the border reports?" Maya asked, her expression growing more serious. Even in this time of peace and rebuilding, she remained acutely aware of the responsibilities that came with her position as Luna Queen. "Quiet as a monastery at midnight," Aldwin assured her. "The new watchtowers you designed have proven most effective, and the healing stations along the trade routes have created goodwill with neighboring kingdoms. Even the Shadow Realm has sent envoys seeking a formal peace treaty." Maya nodded, satisfaction warming her chest. The healing stations had been her idea, places where travelers could receive aid regardless of their origin or ability to pay. It was a radical concept that had initially met with resistance from some of the more traditional nobles, but the results spoke for themselves. Trade had flourished, diplomatic relations had strengthened, and Lightmere had become known throughout the realms as a beacon of compassion and wisdom. The sound of approaching hoofbeats drew Maya's attention, and her heart leaped as she recognized the distinctive rhythm of Fenris's destrier. Even after a year of marriage, after countless nights spent in his arms and days working side by side to rebuild their kingdom, the sight of her mate still made her pulse quicken with desire and love. Fenris rode into the garden courtyard with the natural grace that had first captured her attention, his black hair gleaming in the sunlight and his dark eyes searching until they found her. The moment their gazes met, the mate bond that connected them sang with joy, a harmony that had only grown stronger with time and shared purpose. He dismounted in one fluid motion and strode toward her, his face lighting with the smile he reserved only for her. The formal court attire had been abandoned for simple leather and linen that showed off his powerful frame, and Maya felt her cheeks warm as she remembered their passionate farewell just that morning. "My love," Fenris murmured as he reached her, his large hands coming up to cup her face with infinite tenderness. "How do you feel? The healers said you should rest more, especially now that—" Maya silenced him with a kiss that tasted of promise and homecoming, her arms winding around his neck as she pressed close to the solid warmth of his chest. When they broke apart, both were breathing heavily, and she could see the desire burning in his midnight eyes. "I feel perfect," she whispered against his lips. "Strong and healthy and ready to welcome our child into the world." Fenris's hand moved to cover hers where it rested on her belly, his expression one of wonder and fierce protectiveness. "Our son will be the luckiest child in all the realms, to have you as his mother. Or daughter," Maya corrected with a teasing smile. "And she will be fortunate to have you as her father, my king." They stood together in the garden, surrounded by the beauty they had created and the life they had built from the ashes of betrayal and war. In the distance, Maya could hear the sound of Storm, Frost, and Ember playing with the children from the village, their joyful barks mixing with childish laughter. The three wolves had grown even more magnificent in the past year, their loyalty absolute, and their intelligence continuing to amaze all who met them. "The council meeting went well?" Maya asked, as they began walking toward the castle, her hand tucked securely in the crook of Fenris's arm. "Better than expected," Fenris replied, his voice carrying a note of satisfaction. "The trade agreements with the Eastern Kingdoms have been finalized, and they've specifically requested access to our healing academies. It seems your reputation has spread even further than we imagined." Maya felt a familiar flutter of pride and responsibility. The academies had been her greatest achievement, schools where those blessed with healing gifts could learn to use them safely and effectively. What had started as a single classroom had grown into a network spanning 3 kingdoms, with more being built every month. "And Cordelia?" Maya asked quietly, though she already knew the answer. "Still imprisoned in the tower cell we prepared for her," Fenris replied, his expression hardening slightly. "The enchantments hold her demonic nature in check, and she remains powerless. The council still debates her ultimate fate. But I confess, I care little for the opinion of those who were not there to see her true nature revealed." Maya squeezed his arm gently. They had agreed that execution, though perhaps deserved, would make them no better than their enemies. Instead, Cordelia spent her days in a cell that prevented her from accessing her supernatural abilities, aging slowly toward a natural death while contemplating the consequences of her choices. "She asked to see you again," Fenris continued reluctantly. "I told the guards you were not to be disturbed, but she insisted the matter was urgent." Maya considered this as they climbed the steps to the castle's main entrance. In the months following the battle, Cordelia had requested meetings with her several times, always claiming to have important information about remaining threats or hidden dangers. Each time, the conversations had revealed nothing but attempts to sow doubt and discord. "I'll see her," Maya decided, feeling Fenris's immediate tension. "But not alone, and not for long. If she truly has something important to share, we should hear it." Fenris's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Very well, but I will be present, and we end the meeting the moment she shows even a hint of her old manipulation." They made their way through the castle corridors, past tapestries that now depicted scenes of healing and growth, rather than conquest and war. Servants bowed respectfully as they passed, their faces bright with genuine affection for their rulers. Maya had insisted on treating the castle staff as valued members of their extended family, and the resulting loyalty and joy had transformed the very atmosphere of their home. The tower cell was in the highest part of the castle, its single window offering a view of the kingdom Cordelia had tried so hard to claim. 2 guards stood at attention outside the door, their expressions professional but alert. "Your Majesties," one of them said, bowing deeply. "The prisoner has been quiet today. No unusual activity or requests." Fenris nodded to the guards and opened the heavy door. Inside, Cordelia sat at a small table, her once perfect beauty now showing the effects of a year in captivity. Her platinum hair had grown dull, her flawless skin showed lines of age and bitterness, and her blue eyes held the hollow look of someone who had lost everything. But when she looked up at Maya, those eyes still held a spark of malicious intelligence. "How lovely," Cordelia said, her voice carrying only the faintest echo of its former musical quality. The Luna Queen comes to visit the monster in her tower. How perfectly dramatic. You requested this meeting, Maya replied calmly, taking the seat across from her former adversary. Speak your piece. Cordelia's gaze moved to Maya's pregnant belly, and something ugly twisted her features. So the rumors are true. The peasant healer carries the future of the bloodline. She leaned forward slightly. Tell me, do you ever wonder what your child will inherit from you? Your healing gifts, perhaps? Or something darker? Maya felt Fenris stiffen beside her, but she kept her expression neutral. My child will inherit love, wisdom, and the strength to protect those who cannot protect themselves. How beautifully naive. Cordelia laughed, but the sound was bitter and hollow. You think your power is purely benevolent, don't you? That golden light that flows from your hands, bringing life and healing to all it touches? It has brought nothing but good to this kingdom, Maya replied firmly. Has it? Cordelia's smile was sharp as a blade. Tell me then, dear queen, what happened to Captain Henrik? What became of those Shadow Realm soldiers who felt the touch of your healing power? Maya's hands clenched in her lap, but she said nothing. Cordelia had struck at a source of guilt that Maya had carried for months. In the heat of battle, her power had indeed turned deadly, burning away corruption, but also ending lives. It was a responsibility that weighed heavily on her heart. You felt it, didn't you? Cordelia pressed, sensing weakness. The moment when healing became destroying, when your gift revealed its true nature. Power, pure and simple. The ability to give life or take it away with equal ease. That's enough, Fenris said, his voice carrying the full weight of his alpha authority. You will not torment my mate with your poison. But Cordelia wasn't finished. Your child will inherit that power, little queen. And someday, when they're older and stronger than you ever dreamed of being, they'll have to make the same choice you made in that throne room. To heal or to harm, to save or to destroy. I wonder which they'll choose. Maya stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the stone floor. My child will choose love, she said firmly. As I have chosen, as their father has chosen. They will learn that true strength comes not from the power to destroy, but from the wisdom to know when mercy is stronger than vengeance. She turned toward the door, but Cordelia's voice followed her. We shall see, Luna Queen. We shall see. As they left the tower and made their way back to their chambers, Fenris pulled Maya close, his arms strong and protective around her shoulders. She speaks only to cause pain, he murmured against her hair. You know this. I know, Maya replied, but she couldn't shake the feeling that Cordelia's words contained a grain of truth that would someday need to be faced. That evening, as Maya sat in the great hall teaching a group of young healers the finer points of bone mending, she felt a familiar presence watching her from the shadows. She looked up to see Storm, now fully grown and magnificent, his silver eyes bright with intelligence and affection. The great black wolf padded forward and laid his massive head in her lap, a gesture of love and loyalty that never failed to move her. Frost and Ember joined him, their own distinctive markings now fully developed into patterns of breathtaking beauty. You three, Maya said softly, stroking Storm's thick fur, still protecting me after all this time. As if he understood her words, Storm's tail wagged once, and Maya could swear she saw satisfaction in his ancient eyes. These wolves, born of magic and raised with love, had become living symbols of the transformation that had swept through Lightmere. Where once there had been suspicion and fear, now there was acceptance and wonder. The future stretched before them like an uncharted map, full of promise and possibility. There would be challenges, Maya knew. Cordelia's words had reminded her that power always came with difficult choices, and someday their child would indeed have to navigate the complex responsibility that came with extraordinary abilities. But as she looked around the hall at the faces of her students, young men and women who had come from across the realms to learn the healing arts, Maya felt only hope. They were building something beautiful here, something that would outlast any single generation. The kingdom of Lightmere had been reborn in the light of love and sacrifice, and it would endure for generations to come, protected by the magic they had nurtured and the bonds they had forged. Maya smiled as she felt the baby move within her, a gentle reminder of the future growing beneath her heart. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to serve and protect and heal. But tonight, surrounded by those she loved most in the world, Luna Queen Maya Stormcrest was content.